what's interesting is we have 5 generations in the workplace right now. And so you have someone who might be 19 or 20 or 21 just graduating from college, and someone who's 70, right? And so having those two people on a board or on a team makes for a very interesting situation because they have completely different ideas and ways of thinking, but we should embrace that.
Hello, and welcome to the Dragon Tree Podcast, the show where we talk with great communicators to find out how they do what they do. This week, we're speaking with Christal M. Cherry. Christal is principal and CEO of the Board Pro. She is a nationally acclaimed nonprofit board consultant and certified leadership coach. Christal and her team coach nonprofit boards to harness and optimize their talents and resources to support mission-driven nonprofits. Christal, it's a real pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. Well, I became familiar with your work when I attended an event not too long ago where you spoke to professionals about joining nonprofit boards.
Yes.
So I found you to be a very clear communicator on a subject I think a lot of people actually find daunting. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the podcast. But, with that out of the way, I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the Board Pro and, kind of what your mission is and who you mainly work with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, the Board Pro is my firm. I started it 4 years ago now. It'll be 5 years in January, so I'm so excited that I'll be celebrating my 5-year anniversary. But what happened, Chris, is I was working in the nonprofit sector as a fundraiser. I had been doing so for 23 years. I got burnt out and just decided that I needed to do something else. Right before COVID, of course, I didn't know it was going to happen, pivoted, and decided to work primarily with boards. I had sat in so many boardrooms where the boards just looked bored. They looked confused. They looked apathetic. They just looked like they just weren't sure what was supposed to be going on. And so when I decided to pivot, I just kept thinking, where can I go and make an impact? Where can I take everything that I've learned and still make an impact in the nonprofit sector? And the boardroom is where I landed. And so that was 4 years ago. I've been working with nonprofits ever since then, small grassroots nonprofits with $250,000, $300,000 budgets, and big, large organizations with $50 million budgets. So right across the board, no matter what size your organization, I will work with you.
First, I was also wondering, you talked about the fact that you were a consultant, and I've seen you on other podcasts, and you kind of mentioned that, what you said before, which is that people didn't seem to be knowing what they were supposed to be doing. And another point you made that I think is so interesting is it's almost like all this pent-up energy or pent-up power that people could be deploying that they're not. So I wonder if it's almost like an untapped resource. So I didn't know if that, you obviously noticed that early on, but could you talk a little bit about how you try to draw that out, I guess? Did you go into every situation kind of with that as a North Star, so to speak, that I'm going to try to get more out of this group?
Absolutely. And one of the things I tell them is that they have the power to transform the world. And they kind of snicker at me when I say that. But I really do believe that. I mean, there are 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. And that means there's 1.5 million boards, right? Who have empowered these people, these do-gooders, to come in and to make decisions about their organizations and the future of their organizations and making decisions about millions of lives, right? Whether they're people, whether they're pets, whether it's the environment, they're coming in and they're making big decisions about the trajectory of that organization. And so they don't even realize how much power they have. And so one of the things I really make sure that I really press is that this is a serious commitment. It's a job that you're not really being paid for, but the expectation is that you're going to come, you're going to show up, you're going to be present, you're going to engage, you're going to share. And these days, we're finding that chairs and CEOs are really looking for strategic thinkers. They're looking for visionaries. They're looking for people who can be agile to respond to the chaotic world we're living in right now. It's no longer, we're just going to invite Bob to the boardroom because I play golf with him every Tuesday. We're really looking for people who can bring something to the table. And we always think of board members being rich, or they have to have lots of money, they have to have lots of contacts in order for them to serve on the board. That is absolutely not true. In fact, we find that board members who come to the table who are not rich, right, are the ones who are more willing to come and roll up their sleeves and jump in. The big high C-suite folks, they're busy. They don't have time to come to a board meeting and really engage the way we want. So we want folks, yes, who have connections. We want folks who can make donations. Absolutely. We want folks who come in ready to work.
Yeah, and I'll ask you about a little bit more about that in a while later in the in our conversation because, yeah, that was sort of a presumption I made even before I joined that Catch a Fire session you were co-hosting, is that when you think of a board member, a lot, at least for me, I think of someone more seasoned in their career. But it's I'm actually starting to question that assumption now
Yes.
after digging a little more. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, for those, I think part of our audience here is composed of entrepreneurs. So if we could just kind of zoom back in on kind of how you got started. How I guess how and when did you decide to go out on your own as the board pro? And what was that? You've talked a little bit about the kind of circumstances that surrounded that, but like what was that process like, and how did that transition kind of go for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably, in retrospect, I did it backwards, Chris. I mean, really, what you should do if you're going to start your own business, become entrepreneurs, you should sit down and write a business plan, right? And figure out who your customers are, who your primary customers are, who their competitors are, who your competitors are, how you're going to market yourself, what services you're going to offer. Like you sit down and you write your whole plan out, and then you get
Right.
started. Like I didn't do that. I just started doing the work. Because I just thought, well, I'm a great communicator. I was a fundraiser. I know the nonprofit sector. I'm just going to do the work. And so I ended up doing it backwards. I worked for many months, and then pivoted backwards and said, okay, now I need to sit down and make this a formal thing, right? So I sat down and I wrote my business plan. I wrote my vision, my mission, who my clients were. I opened a bank account, like all the things that you're supposed to do.
Sure.
I didn't do that first because what happened was I opened right as the pandemic was happening. Right? Of course, I didn't know it was January of 2020. Things started out really slow. Then the pandemic happened. Everything kind of froze for a few weeks, right? And then the doors just bust wide open. George Floyd was killed. There was just a lot going on. People were passing away. And all of a sudden, nonprofits started calling in because they wanted Black consultants, right? This whole DEI thing kind of burst to the scene, and everyone wanted to kind of prove that they were not racist. And they wanted to find Black consultants and Black people who can come in and work with them. And so my phone started ringing off the hook. And so I was kind of thrust into podcast interviews and speaking engagements and sitting on panels and people calling me and asking me to do all kinds of things for them, which was great. I think during that time, I was seeing double. I was so busy. I had a son who at that time was, I don't know, 10, 11 years old. And I was so busy. He would be asking me something about homework, and I'd be like, I can't talk to you right now. I'm busy. I'll call you. Give me 5 minutes. I'll get right back to you. I mean,
Oh wow.
really, that's how crazy it was. And so I kind of got thrust into the limelight. But it was good because things were moving so fast. I said yes to everyone and everything, Chris. I took jobs. Sometimes I probably didn't invoice for as high as I should have, but I just wanted to get my name out there. And so when people would ask me to come and speak, I said yes. People wanted me to present at a conference, I said yes. People wanted me to work for them, I said yes. And so it was just a way for me to get experience, for people to earn credibility, people to see that I knew what I was talking about, and for me to really learn whether or not this was something I wanted to do. And so those first 8 months or so was crazy. And then I lost my partner to COVID. In
Oh
August of
no.
2020. So things kind of came to a screeching halt for a few minutes. I still had lots of gigs and things I was trying to do. But I took a month off, and then afterwards I got back to work. And actually, it helped that that I was busy. But that first year, I want to say, was so good in so many ways because we were all home, we were all hunkered down and on Zoom, and I met so many good people on Zoom. And some of my friends and colleagues who I'm friends with now today are people who I met during that time. So if you're going to start your own business and be an entrepreneur, do it the right way. Write your business plan, figure out who your customers are, what services you're going to offer, get your bank account, your website, your business cards, get all that stuff set up and before you jump. But I jumped first. It was just the way it happened, but it worked out in the end. But one of the things I did early on was I found my tribe, right? So I found a group of other consultants. So I joined Consultants for Good, the African American Development Officers Network. They have a consulting contingency that I've joined. I'm part of a group called Fabulous Female Fundraisers, which I founded. We have a third of us are consultants. And so I really made sure that I kept in touch with folks who were doing similar work. And we shared stories, we shared ideas, we shared resources. Who are you using to invoice? How do you manage your time? What do you do if a client doesn't pay? Do you have an attorney? Who does your taxes? Like all the things that we know when you're going to start your own business that you should know. What do you do for client acquisition? Like if things are really slow, how do you try to get new clients right away? Who does your email list? Whose website are you on? Like in terms of, is your website through Wix? Is it through GoDaddy? How much do they charge? Like we just really started sharing stories, and I learned a lot by some people were more seasoned than I was, and so they had more experiences and they had a lot of resources, and so being in a group of other consultants really helped me. And so I say to anyone who's looking to start their own business, find other consultants. Don't think of them as competitors. Find other consultants who are doing work similar and not similar to yours, and ask them questions about the business and how it's going and what things work for them and what hasn't, so that you can figure out what's right for you.
That's excellent advice. I'll if go ahead and put some of those links in the show notes, even so people might be able to follow in your footsteps. I found, and I'm so grateful you mentioned this, because I think tell me what you think, but I think LinkedIn is a great place to start. There's a lot of really good groups on LinkedIn I've found.
Yes.
Is that kind of where you started, or did you kind of just start by Googling things, or how did you find your tribe exactly?
So prior to COVID and starting my own business, I think I had an account on LinkedIn, but I think I may have had one picture that was probably like 15 years old, and all my information was outdated. Now, the first thing I do when I get up every morning is I check my email and I check LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has proven to be the greatest marketing tool for me. Um, I don't do any advertising. Like I haven't done any
Oh,
Facebook ads or anything like that. And so most of my business has come from people seeing me out on the airwaves, whether I'm doing a podcast interview like this, whether or not they see me on LinkedIn. I post regularly, probably 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, just depending on what it is. I'm trying to communicate with people when I do. And then the other thing I started doing was engaging with people. So I would go on other people's pages, right, and say, congratulations on the great award you just won, or I just read your article and it was awesome, or oh my goodness, I see you serve on 3 ports. Tell me about your experience. Would you mind having a virtual coffee with me? I had a lot of virtual coffees with people during COVID. Everyone was home. And even though you were a complete stranger, people said yes. And so I would just get on, have coffee, and we would just chit chat about what's going on in your world, what's going on in my world. And I maintain friendships by doing that. And so LinkedIn turned out to be a great tool for me.
those are some great tips. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Yeah, and I guess kind of similarly to the question I asked earlier, you are kind of focused mostly on nonprofits. So I'm wondering why, and you've explained a good deal why you work with nonprofits. I think it's because, well, why don't I ask you? Why do you work primarily with nonprofits?
It's just the space that I've been in for 25, now 28 years, and so I'm comfortable in this space. Although I do have some clients who are not nonprofits, and so I found that a lot of CRM companies, companies who have software where they're working with donors and volunteers, like Catch a Fire, like Easy Board, like Get Connected by Galaxy Digital. These are all clients of mine who are not nonprofits, but who are working with volunteers and board members, who found that by having a relationship with me, it helps them to connect to that specific demographic. And so I do have other clients that are not nonprofits. Most are primarily nonprofits, but I've worked with community foundations, I've worked with United Way, I've worked with associations, I've worked with colleges and universities. I've done Emory University was a client. Spelman College was a client. So I have had all kinds of clients. It's not just nonprofits.
Gotcha. And we should, before we go any further, we should add that you are based in the Atlanta area,
I
correct?
am, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Most of my clients are not in Atlanta, Chris. Most of my clients are, I work all across the country and world. So
Oh,
most of my
great.
clients are not here in Georgia.
Yeah, that's the power of the internet now and all
Yes.
this interconnectedness.
And a
Well,
lot of board work is being done virtually. That's one of the trends we're seeing, right?
oh,
A lot of
interesting.
organizations are going to hybrid meetings, which means that they can recruit people to serve on their board who are not necessarily proximate to their organization. So you can live in California and serve on the board of an organization in New York. Right. And that was not necessarily the case before. But now that we've moved to this hybrid model, a lot of organizations have now expanded their reach in terms of who they're looking for to serve on the board, which has been great for me.
That's a really interesting point. So, in your experience, it sounds like it's hybrid or maybe totally virtually most of the time. But even when in those remote circumstances, do are you finding that they at least want the people to be in person once a year or periodically or
Yeah, yeah.
not at
Well,
all?
I've had a couple clients who they've never met in person, right? They
Oh,
only meet remote. But yes, a lot of them will say we'll have an in-person meeting once a year. I've had clients say, the remote thing has really made it harder for people to connect, and so they're trying to get back to more in person. But with people being all over the country, it's hard, right?
hmm.
But yeah, that's definitely this virtual space has really made kind of broadened the reach for a lot of our nonprofits.
And maybe that's a kind of lowers the not lowers the bar for entry from a quality standpoint, but just from a practical standpoint. So
And
that's good to know
from a diversity standpoint,
from a
because we have,
diversity standpoint. Exactly,
yeah, because we've
exactly.
had folks
Yeah,
say we don't have this, we don't have people of color in our area, we don't have Hispanics in our area. But now with this, you can reach out outside of your immediate town and find folks who are qualified to sit on your board
that's
who
so.
may fit those groups.
Who would have thought? I would have never. That's one of my misconceptions of boards. Is I just see it as a room full of people around like a big table, right? I don't. That's we have to update our conception of what a board is. It sounds like, or at least I do. Well, yeah, that's so interesting, Christal, and you just alluded to it in your answer. But what in general, what attributes would you say organizations are looking for in a typical board member? And I guess do nonprofits look for different characteristics than some of your corporate clients? Would you say?
Yeah, no, every nonprofit is looking for different things. So I actually do board search, Chris. I actually try I work with nonprofits to find the right people to sit on their boards. And I have two open searches going on right now, and they both want two completely different things, right? And
Oh,
so, so one of my
way to
clients
go.
is World Animal Protection, and they're a global organization, an international organization, and I'm working for the U.S. office. And so they're looking for a board member who is seasoned, who has expertise in finance matters, are passionate about animals, maybe someone who's had some international experience in terms of governance. So they're a very niche organization looking for a very specific type of person. Whereas Kids in Tech, which is another organization I'm working with out of Boston, small grassroots organization, and she's looking for folks who can come in who are passionate about working with kids in technology, who have experience working in the field of technology, who are who are thought leaders, who are interested in working with someone who is a founder, because she's a founder, small nonprofit, who have connections and who are not afraid to ask for resources for the organization. So every organization is looking for something different. However, there is some commonalities and there are some common traits of nonprofit board members. First of all, they have to be passionate about something, right? Usually there's a cause that resonates with them, and it could be because of a personal connection. It could be because mom had cancer, so and so's cousin was homeless, or that you had some kind of financial trouble and you're working with a financial organization or not, right? And so, but usually there's some kind of connection. Something about that organization makes your heart throb, right? So that's the first thing that matters.
Mhm.
And then, second of all, we need folks who are open and willing to give, right? We need you to be able to put aside everything that's going on in your crazy life right now, and for that 1 hour, hour and a half that you meet with those board members, your mind needs to be free so that you can walk in that door, be ready to hear what's going on with that organization, be ready to engage, to contribute, to give good ideas, to dissent. It's okay not to agree with everything everyone says, right? To be able to look at a budget and ask questions to say, well, here on line 3, it says so and so and so and so. And I noticed that last year we didn't have this expense. What is this, right? So you really need to be able to you don't have to be an accountant, but you need to be able to read a budget statement, right, and what that looks like. So we're looking for people who are giving, who are passionate, who are ready to come and engage, who can put aside all their other life distractions for a while when they come into this board space and really give this organization their full 100% attention, who understands that this executive director or this CEO is working his or her butt off to make this organization run. And they really need support from this board to help them do that. And that could mean going with them on a donor visit to visit with a donor, or helping them to write a grant application, or to speak at an event. So there are lots of things that ways that boards can engage, but they really are supposed to support that executive director, give oversight to the organization, provide strategic direction, and make sure there are resources for that organization for years to come.
And it's interesting when you're talking. I know there must be a give and take where to me, it's very clear that a board would, or representatives of a board would be looking for certain attributes. But does it go the other way too? Are there people? There must be people out there looking to join a board. So, I mean, is at least part of what you do to connect the two? And I guess the second part of that question is, if so, how do you find the people who want to join boards?
Yeah. So right now, like I said, I have two open searches, and so I just as you would if you were had an opening at your job and you were looking for a new staff person or a new employee, I put ads out. They're all over LinkedIn. They're on
Oh,
Indeed.com. They're on Impact Opportunity. I do a lot of cold calling on LinkedIn. So if you told me, for instance, you were interested in someone who worked at Delta Airlines because you want Delta Airlines on your board, I go to LinkedIn and type in Delta Airlines, and a whole slew of names pop up,
right.
right? I go out to events and I talk to people. Someone says, like for instance, I was talking to someone recently. She said that she did something in technology, and my eyes lit up. And she said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I'm doing a board search for this organization, looking for people who are working in the technology field. Let me tell you about it."
Oh,
And
wow.
so I'm always out and about talking to people about the organizations that I'm representing. If I find someone who I think would be a good fit, I'm absolutely going to tell them. I have a list of about 2,000 names that I send emails out to about this, and so my search is far and wide, and I'm doing a lot of calling, a lot of talking, a lot of prospecting. So that's kind of how I find my board members. And then once I find them, I talk to them, I interview them, I ask them questions. What does being on a board mean to you? What does board service mean to you? How can we make this a meaningful experience for you? Like, this is a two-way street, because when you go in on that interview, I want you to figure out whether this is a good fit for you. I mean, they're going to be looking at you to see if you're a good fit for them, but this is something that's going to be personal to you, and I want you to feel some reward from it as well. And so one of the questions I ask them is, how can we make this a meaningful experience for you? What would you like to see, or what would you like to walk away from when your tenure is up in 2 years or 3 years? You want to walk away from this experience with what? You want to have more connections. You want to have a wider skill set. You want to know more about this mission, about the ecosystem that this organization is sitting in. Like, what is your goal for sitting on this board? So I make sure this is a two-way street, and like you said, this is a reciprocal relationship. It's not just one-sided. I think of this as a serious commitment. To me, it is like a job, but it's an unpaid job. And so when people come to interviews, I had one time, I had a person come to an interview for a board seat with curlers in her hair, and I told
Oh,
her, yeah, and I told her, I said, this is not the right, this is not, you're not ready,
oh.
because this is a serious commitment. And so I do that purposely to let people know that we have been strategic about this. We are serious about the people we're recruiting this on this board. We want to make sure we find the right candidates. This is serious work. You're impacting lives, you're impacting the environment, you're impacting animals when you serve on this board. And so therefore we want to make sure you come to this table prepared and ready to take this on as a serious commitment.
And that's the a couple of times now you've mentioned, which I like the refrain, which is preparation, be prepared. And I'm my question, I guess, building off that is, I have to imagine putting myself in the mindset of maybe the old mindset of being on a board is that, okay, I'm here. Tell me what you need and I'll do my best off the top of my head to help, versus coming in with ideas. So is that something you foreground when you're looking for someone, is
Yeah.
like, this is something you're going to have to bring actual ideas to the table?
So when I have let's say I have a slate of candidates who are all interviewing to be on a board, before they even interview with the organization, I send them a whole bunch of information, right? If I can, I send them a strategic plan, I send them the annual report, I sit down and I talk to them about who's leading the organization, the executive director or CEO, what his or her vision or legacy is for an organization. I'll talk about the current board members and what that culture is like. I'll tell them what the long-term vision is for this organization. I'll tell them about the staff and what kind of relationship the staff has with the CEO, what kind of relationship the staff has with the board. So I'm really trying to entrench them into the life of the organization before they even join, to make sure that they're clear whether or not this is an organization that they really want to be affiliated with. And then I'll do a couple of little small board trainings, like these are the attributes of a strong board member. These are the things that you should expect from being on the board. This is what is basically is expected from you from serving on the board. So by the time they get to the interview, they know what questions to ask. They know that there's a strategic plan that's in the process, and then so they can ask some questions about what are your long-term goals for the organization. How does the CEO like to communicate with the board? So I prep them and prepare them so that when they do interview with the organization, they have a whole bunch of knowledge and information about that organization, about the staff, about the mission. They've seen the strategic plan, they've seen the annual report, they know what kind of events this organization has had, they know about their fundraising goals, everything. So I prepare them so they're ready.
Thanks for that really detailed explanation. I think that a lot of members of our audience, no matter what their professional background, will really benefit from these insights. So I appreciate that.
Good.
Yeah, and we've talked about like what being a board member kind of entails. And I wonder if we can kind of build on that and kind of come back to something you mentioned earlier, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And my question is, you talked about just through your own autobiography that we talked about at the beginning, why it's so important. But now we're 4 years later. We talked about 2020, and now we're in 2024. Why, in your conception, how does this, keeping this front of mind, this diversity piece, does that remain a key element in what at least when a board is out there looking for new members, they still have that top of mind, and how do you go about kind of making those connections?
Yeah, no, I think diversity is still an important topic. I don't think it's as um, people are not as fervent about it as they were back in 2020. But yes, I think a lot of organizations have realized that they don't have representation on their boards from the communities they're actually serving. And it's really hard to make decisions about people when you have no clue what their lived experience is like. And so I think they realize, how can a board of all white men make decisions about teenage black girls, right? And particularly if they don't have any experience, they're not proximate to that experience, and so it would be really tough for them to continue, which is what we've been doing. And so they realize now that they need to have more voices from the table so that they can not only understand those stories, but know what their needs are and know how they want their stories to be told, right? So we're really now centering in on the client, centering in on the person that we're actually helping. And it's less about who's on that board, but more about who's on that board who can connect with those people.
And I think I used a really interesting word there, story, and it sounds like storytelling or allowing people to tell their stories is also a key ingredient. Is that
Oh,
true?
absolutely. Absolutely. I recall years ago when I worked at a homeless shelter, I was a fundraiser there, and I used to give tours, monthly tours of the shelter to people who wanted to come in and see the shelter. And I would, we had this whole script that we used that my boss had given me. And, in the script, I had stories about clients, right? Some of the stories were true and some of them weren't. And one of the clients overheard me on this tour. And after the tour was over, she pulled me aside and she said, I see that you give these tours every month. And I said, yes. And she said, so you're following a script? And I said, yes. And she says, how come you've never asked me what it's like to be homeless?
Oh.
How come you've never asked me what my real life experience is like instead of these made up stories? And I felt horrible. And I took that information to my boss and I said, we really need to lean in so that we'll understand exactly what's going on and not assume that we know what it's like, and ask these individuals how they want their stories told. What do they want people to know about them? And what they wanted to know is, guess what? I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm educated, I'm a Christian, because people had preconceived notions and stereotypes about what homeless people look like, right? They thought they were some kind of drugged out, uneducated. And as it turns out, these women, many of them were educated. They had been nurses, they had been doctors, they had been teachers, and had come on bad luck. right? Was in a bad divorce, became ill, lost their job. Like all these things happened, and they were one or two paychecks away from living in their car, and the next thing you know, they're living in a shelter. And so, really hearing those stories firsthand really helped. When I took that information to the board, I'm like, we got to change our whole the way we're telling the story. We have to change our whole marketing strategy. And so that's why it's really important to have those voices at the table.
That's interesting, and part of diversity that I think maybe we don't think about a lot is age diversity, and that's something we touched on earlier about my assumptions I often make about boards being full of kind of stuffy older people. Especially during, again, I'll come back to that Catch a Fire webinar I sat in on that you were a moderator on, a speaker on. I think that you made pretty clear, actually, that it's not always the older, more seasoned people that every board is interested in. They want a diversity of voices, whether it be background or even age. It seems like, is that? Can we talk a little bit about that for a minute? Because I
Sure.
think that plays into the daunting nature maybe of approaching a board. Is, oh well, maybe I don't have enough experience. Like what business would I have on a board?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're finding, that when you diversify your board just becomes more rich, you know. And so with age, we're finding, first of all, boards are getting younger. The average age of a board, I want to say, was late 60s, predominantly white, predominantly male. And the age has come down to the 50s now. I think it's 54, 55, still predominantly male. But women, it might be close. It might be 51%, 48%. So women have really come up on terms of being present on boards, and we're finding people who are younger who come and sit on boards. They don't have the same hangups as us baby boomers, right? And so they definitely want to see things done differently. They're not scared to ask for what they want, so therefore they raise more money, right? They're not afraid to have events that would before have us clutching our pearls. They want to have, yoga on the lawn. They want to have cross dressers at their events. They want to have, where some of us baby boomers, we're accustomed to having the dried up chicken dinner at the Marriott Hotel, right? With the long gowns. These folks don't want to do that. They want to have a poetry slam, right? They want to have some kind of artist event. They want to have spoken word, and they
Sure.
want to do things a little differently. And they're not scared to tell people about the organization and invite them to come out and invite them to give. And so, what's interesting is we have five generations in the workplace right now. And so you have someone who might be 19 or 20 or 21 just graduating from college, and someone who's 70, right? And so having those two people on a board or on a team makes for a very interesting situation, because they have completely different ideas and ways of thinking, but we should embrace that, right? And so I've had to stop, because this is the way we've always done it, right? We always have the chicken dinner. What do you mean? And so when my young staff person said, I want to have yoga on the lawn, I think we all turned around and looked at her like, yoga on the lawn, right? But then I had to stop and say, okay, well, tell me more about that, right? And so really having to just say, these are our future leaders, so we need to make sure that they can weigh in now. The world is changing, Chris, right? We can't stick with the same old ways that we've been doing things. The other thing I want to say about diversity is, the word that comes to mind is power, right? And so in the past, it's the same old folks who've had the power on the board to make the decisions. Isn't it? Now we're saying, let younger people come on, let women come on, let people of color come on, let LGBTQ folks come on, and let them weigh in and have some power in terms of how this organization moves forward. And because their voices matter, they're in this community that we're actually serving. And to not have them at the table where they can also say yay or nay to a decision is a travesty. And so that is one of the things that we really push when we start talking about diversity. But it's not just diversity. We want to have them at the table, but we also want to make sure that we're prepared for them when they come, right? Because this means your culture is going to shift, right? You may have been very conservative before. Everyone wore short ties to the board meeting. Now kids come in, they got on a jeans jacket and that's okay, right? You might have someone come in, they might have an earring in their ear or a tattoo on their neck, or they might have dreadlocks or something, right? It's a whole different world. And so we're saying to my clients, listen, if you're going to talk about diversity, we must also talk about inclusion. We must also talk about belonging, what that feels like. And so you need to ask people, what does it feel like for you to belong somewhere? Like what, and people will say, I want to be able to come to the table in my true authentic self. I want to be able to say it how I want to say it. If my voice is light, I want to be able to say it the way I want to say it. If I have an accent, if I speak broken English, I want to be able to say it the way I want to say it. And I want to be received well. I want to be my opinion to count. I don't want any retaliation or hostility because I might think differently than you. And so if you're really saying you want to be diverse and you want to be inclusive, then you really have to start changing your mindset. And that means you have to deal with your own feelings and stereotypes and biases about people. And so when I do work, the DEI work, those are the kinds of exercises and work that we actually do together.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I always think like even if you were as cynical a business person as you can imagine, right?
Yeah.
It just makes sense to have diversity because that's the people, that's the marketplace anyway.
Yes.
That's who you're trying to reach. So even if you want to think about it from a purely capitalistic, purely, cynically business oriented way, it still makes sense to have diversity to me. So, because I can imagine there's a couple, maybe hopefully just one or two, but maybe a couple audience members who are watching this and are a little bit skeptical. And I mean, I don't know. I've always kind of fallen back on that as it just kind of makes sense just from a practical standpoint too. I don't know if you ever have to make that argument or if it's kind of just in the
I mean, yeah, I think it's
zeitgeist at this point.
yeah, no, I think you want to come. It makes sense to have a business case, right? A case for why diversity is important because people want to know that how this is going to impact the bottom line, right? And so you definitely want to come in and have your case. But it's just an ethical and a moral case as well, right? In terms of it's just the right thing to do, right? Like
Absolutely.
our
Yeah,
young
absolutely.
people are interacting more so than we did. You know, many of us lived in segregated environments and segregated communities. Our young people now with the internet, they have friends across races, across genders, across all kinds of things. And so their experiences and their exposure to people is just different than those of us who have been around for a long time. And so with that, the world is going to shift. The way people interact with one another is going to shift. And we need to come on board with that for these nonprofits.
That's all right. And speaking of kind of, a mind shift, I wonder how much, you talked earlier about how you serve on several boards and you even founded a nonprofit called Fabulous Female Fundraisers Incorporated or F3.
Yes,
So I wonder if we could talk about, how your work has informed that, both your representation on boards yourself and also founding a nonprofit. And I presume you have a board for the nonprofit. Is
I
that
do.
correct?
I'm the chair of the board. Yes.
And you're the chair of the board. I think you
Yes.
did say that. I apologize. So could you talk about how that, you have like almost like a personal stake in it now, and how does that inform your work as a consultant?
Well, the good thing about this organization is that it's made up primarily of fundraisers, right? And so all of us have worked in the nonprofit space for many, many years. And so how to start a nonprofit was something we all knew. I had some knowledge of, so that helped. We knew we needed to get our 501c. We knew we needed to have
Yeah.
a board. We needed to have a mission, vision, value statement, a website that was appealing to donors. We knew we need to be able to have testimonies about how we're impacting the people in the community we're actually serving. So we know how to tell the story about the work that we do, and that has really, really helped. And then as a board, being a board consultant, I've come in, I helped them to do the bylaws, and we just did our culture statement and um, conflicts of interest and our giving policies. Like, we knew how to do this because we do this work every day with other nonprofits. So it made it a little easier. So now the task is just letting the world know the great work that we're actually doing. And so this is a nonprofit that's a support system and a community for Black women who work in the fundraising space as nonprofit fundraisers. And what we found over the years is that Black people in the nonprofit sector have come out and shared some of the harm that has been done to them, some of the racism they experienced working in the nonprofit sector. And so, as Black women, as Black people, we often find ourselves as the only Black person on the team, the only Black person on the department, only Black woman in the department. And so you feel alone. You feel like I don't really have anyone who really understands, me and understands how I think. And often I feel marginalized. I feel overlooked. And so this was a place for us to all get together and to really support one another. And so now, what started out was just two girlfriends getting together to talk about some of the concerns they had working in the space has now joined, has now happened. We have 70 women of color in 22 states and in Canada who have joined our organization. It's a membership nonprofit. They pay a membership fee to be a part of the nonprofit, and throughout the year, we provide all kinds of resources and support to this small community of women.
Well, thank you so much, Christal, for joining us today and sharing all of your insights about the very impactful work that you do. And
Thank
I was
you.
just, yeah, absolutely. And I was wondering, is there anywhere online people can find you if they want to continue this conversation or find out more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Chris. My website is theboardpro.com, and so that is the best place to find me. You can always find me on LinkedIn at Christal M. Cherry. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm always accepting new friends, so please send me a friend connection, and I'm happy to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Thank you very much. And thanks for joining today. Have a great day.
Thank you, you too.